Artwork, critiques, Photoshop files, and reference sheets are all available on my Patreon. Before I get started, I just wanted to let you guys know about the December tablet giveaway. I'm going to be giving away an XP Pen Artist 12 to one of you lovely lot worldwide, and all you've got to do to be in with a chance is follow me on Instagram, like my last post, and let me know what character you'd like to see me draw. Well, hello there guys, my name's Mikey, welcome back to my room. It's time for another tutorial. And today we're going to be covering how to colour in your darker and brown skinned anime characters. Now this is another of our basic Photoshop tutorials, and we have already done a basic one on light skinned characters, but there are some different things to think about when you're getting in some darker tones and some different tricks to bear in mind just to make sure that the skin doesn't look too flat or grey or dead. You want to have your characters having a load of life. Now, I've already got tutorials on how to actually build up your characters using basic shapes as a guide, so I've gone ahead and just time-lapsed the actual bit where I'm putting the line art together for today's example, just so that we can dive straight into the colouring stage. So here we are with a basic character design ready to go. Maybe you guys want to pause the video for a moment so that you can draw your own characters at home, or maybe you just want to pop over to my Patreon and download this template, which you can get in my tutorials workpack. In either case, the main thing to bear in mind is that I've got my line art here on a separate layer from the background. And one of the first things I'm going to do before I get colouring is actually create a very neutral grey tone to start off with. And what this does, if I just select a grey in the background on another layer and just fill things in there, is it makes things a little bit easier for your eyes, just so that you're not glaring against really bright backgrounds all the time, but also that neutral grey tone allows us to understand colours a little bit more objectively when we're actually getting everything into place. So the first thing I'm going to do is pop onto a new layer and make sure that I've got the basic colour blocking out of the way. This is always the homework or the background work which makes things much easier in the long term. Now, because I'm going for a darker, browner skinned character, I'm going to slide right down to red in Photoshop and look for something right down in the middle of this box, something that's not too saturated and gives me a very earthy tone. And the reason why I'm doing that in reds instead of going right down to grey and browns is I always want to bear in mind that we need to keep things looking fresh and alive. I'm going to also be using a brush with a hard edge, just for very simple Photoshop brushes. And again, you can certainly download my brush packs if you want to, they're free, but really there's only about 6 brushes in them because I do live a very simple life. Now what you can do is just go ahead and get a zone in which is going to take care of everything like this. Really just block out this entire area, everywhere that's going to be skin. And the reason why we can be rough around the edges is because we can use a magic wand tool in just a moment to actually tidy things up. In fact, maybe I'm being too conservative. If I just go ahead and make this even bigger, there we go, even more work, even less time. So I've got all of these red tones out like so. And what I can do is go back to my line art layer, get the magic wand tool and just click on the outside of my lines just to select everything else in the background. And I'm going to go to select and then modify and then expand, just so that this area of selection is going to expand in by about, let's go for 7 pixels, just to bring things in a touch. And then back to the layer which has got my base skin tone and just press delete. And that just really neatens things up in the background a bit. I'm going to pop into my eraser tool as well, again with a hard edge, just to clear up a few bits that might be caught out by some sort of phantom extra lines as well. But other than that, we're good to go. And then onto a new layer where I'm just going to block out a few other bits. With darker skinned characters, obviously you can have any haircut you like, but I do tend to find that they work quite well with very light haired characters. So again, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit for detail's sake and just start to actually, with my actual paintbrush that is, go around the edges of this area of hair and make sure that I've got all of this zone coloured in as well. So I'm just going to bump up some time lapse just so that we've got this bit out of the way, and you're also going to see that I'm going to make a fresh layer for just the separate parts of the clothing, and I think some gold bangles on the arms, because again with darker skinned characters, things like gold really pops out really nicely. Okay, so we've got all of the basics out of the way. We've got separate layers for the skin all blocked out. We've got our hair and all of the different sort of extra elements going on. This is just a tutorial for colouring in your darker skinned characters, but it is always really useful in the back of your mind to have a bit of an overall plan for the character's design and palette as well. And what I'm going to do now is really just start to decide, how dark do I want my character? Do I want fairly light brown tones, or are we going to start going right deep in towards the blacker range? So I think for this we'll go for something relatively medium. I'm going to take my slider over here and just bring it a little bit closer to the oranges. Again, I'm not going anywhere near the right hand side where everything's really saturated. I'm pretty much right down the middle for now. And I'm just going to bring things up towards a tone that's just going to pull something a little bit lighter. But I'm going to be using the very soft brush. I'm going to make it very large, and I'm going to lower the opacity just so that I don't do anything too direct immediately. I'm going to let these things build up, and I'm going to, on this skin layer, select a new layer over here, right click and create clipping mask, which basically means anything I do is only going to show up over the skin. And I'm just going to start to lightly brush in a bit of a slightly lighter tone, just to see what happens. And I am just focusing the airbrush area over the boobs, areas that are actually just going to catch the light, essentially. A few taps over the face as well, about 39 opacity for this brush. And then what I've managed to do is already just give myself a very, very loose gradient from some areas of maybe a bit more occluded shadow over to some lighter zones. And then I'm going to just pop onto a layer above again, still going to keep things clipped. And the first thing I tend to do once I've got my skin palette to a place where I'm relatively happy is start off with the hard shadows. So I'm going to go back to this hard edged brush, make it just a little bit larger, and with the shadows I'm actually going to scroll over to the redder and purple zone, still mostly red, but really taking things kind of over there, and I'm going to pull this right down to somewhere over here. When it comes to the shadow zones and getting some darker tones, I'm going to let myself go a little bit more saturated. And I'm really kind of technically working with the purple, but I get to play around and change this as I see fit as we go on. So let's imagine for this character it's relatively simple. We've got a light source which is coming very much from the top of this character. And now I'm just going to start to explore my way around with this harder brush to see where those cast shadows are going to start to kick in. So the hair is casting a shadow over here. Ooh, I will just make sure that opacity is at 100% just so we've got things solid for the moment. So maybe I'm just going to bring a few bits down here, mimic the shape of that hairline there and just down here as well. And I'm going to let that shadow zone get a little bit thicker up towards the forehead. I'm probably going to clean up that line a little bit on the left hand here as well. I've just decided right now to make the shadow just fall over there a little bit more predominantly. So let's pop back and get this guy back in. Lovely. And just following the way around, and really this is where you want to be imagining your characters and their designs as 3D shapes. These are the shadows that are going to really help kind of describe some of the forms that the shadows are cast onto, as well as the shapes which are casting them. So I'm going to maybe tuck a little bit of hard shadow there, maybe just follow the line of that nose a touch. I'm going to just reinforce some of these lines I've got describing some of the shapes around the eye really quickly. Nothing too crazy, because we are going to be coming back in with a soft brush doing the very similar thing, just mapping out softer areas of shadow. But around the nose, for example, is often a very good opportunity to sort of say what's going on here, and around the lips and anywhere that you've got dimples and places when they're going to catch stuff. So it's kind of exploring your way around the piece, trying to work out, can I get away with a bit of a harder edge here? Maybe I'm going to put a little something around just the edge of the cheek line here, and maybe there's a really clear cast shadow right under the chin, just to show that that's all popping forward as well. So this is what I'm doing as I'm making my way around. Let's cast a little bit or occlude a little bit just up here. like so, and let's just keep making our way down. You can always fit in some cheeky bits just here on the collarbones, maybe a little bit of a zone, actually let's Control Z that, maybe a little bit of a zone just down in here where you've got a few tucks of the skin. I want to see a bit of shadow just down there, up on the edge of the arm here, and then, well, we've got a bit of shadow cast by this kind of bangle. The boobs are probably casting all over this arm here, just blocking the light as it shines down, and then maybe a little bit over here, just occluded of course, like so. I'm just using these to again reinforce these kind of other three-dimensional shapes that we've got going on there. Really, you can just keep exploring how much you do or don't want to express on your character when it comes to these bits. And don't be too put off by the fact that we're doing some very hard colours and some very hard lines. Because we've got it all on a separate layer, we're still in control. We get to manage whether we want to make these softer, get rid of them all together and do something else. That's why you always want to make sure you've got your layers sorted out, and you basically do the boring bit of homework first. Plan out your layers, get some basic tones for the background so that you can use clipping masks and so on. And in the long run, that's going to make your painting experience way easier, much less of a headache, because sometimes you can get yourself too far down one idea and want to come back from it and realize, yikes, you're stuck. Well, not today. And so having done just a bit down this side on the right of the arm as well, we're ready to actually crack on and do a very similar thing. And you can use the same layer here, or maybe just pop onto another layer altogether and merge them a little bit later, which is what I'm going to do. And I've still got that exact same color, but now I'm using that soft brush which has got 0 hardness, and I am lowering the opacity now around about 40% to just start to work out where these softer tones are going to be indicated. So where we've kind of got the whole eye area hooded in, I'm just going to gently put a little bit more accentuation around the crevices here and up here as well. Much less obtrusive for tones. I can put a little bit up the top as well, again just to reinforce that occlusion, and maybe I just want to get this whole lips area just darkened up a little bit so that I know I can kind of come back and have some fun with that later. Possibly even something a little bit similar around the nose. The area under the head as well might not have a really solid shadow, but I might just make that a bit darker just to show that there's still things getting cast down, and you can just start to pick up these areas where everything's meeting up here and here, just to drop those tones. Maybe just accentuate around where there's bangles biting into the flesh just a bit. A little bit further down here on the arms, and maybe because these are slightly cylindrical shapes, we've got some kind of softer gradients going on around here as well. And then with the boobs as well, you've got to imagine that these are obviously all sorts of deformed spheres of shape, so to speak, balloons full of water and so on. So just kind of work out where those curves are and what you're up to. And what's often quite useful is because the front of the chest area is a relatively flat plane, it's nice to describe the change in direction as the flesh comes out for the boobs by sometimes just selecting those boob curves, something like that, and then just putting in a very light bit of soft brush as the boobs just meet back into the chest directly. Now I'm going to make this a bit larger just so I get much more of a gentler gradient, not too much at all, but once we remove that selection tool again, you can just kind of see it's describing a change in direction of the overall surface. So what we need to do again now is kind of start to clean that up. I might just go ahead and have a very soft brush for my eraser tool and just clean up where I've been putting that in around the lips, just to define that area a little bit more nicely. I'm going to make this a little bit larger and softer as well. Just tidy up a bit around there, and on my harder line layer, I'm going to do the same thing with that soft eraser tool, just to bring a few of these lines just in a little bit, just take the sharpness out of them just a tiny bit, so that we've got some slightly more organic character shape going on here. But maybe I'm happy with everything else around there. So now that we've got the shadows out of the way, it's time to start thinking towards the lit areas that are catching more light and giving us some highlights. Again, I'm popping onto a new layer and again create clipping mask, and now I'm bringing that slider back down to the kind of orange town that we had over here, and I'm just going to bring up something lighter again, around about up there, and I'm going to be keeping this all on a soft brush Again, I've got that opacity relatively low, 38% for the moment, and I'm just going to very lightly start to think about describing those slightly more lit areas as well. For example, the actual hood of the eyes themselves, the eyelids I should say, not the hood, might just be catching a little bit more light, a little bit more life as well. I think the cheeks are probably getting a good bit of light on them there, so maybe we're just going to bring these forward just a touch like so. Again, I'm using some very gentle taps with this very soft brush as I'm making my way around. Around on the shoulders here, we're probably going to catch a lovely bit of light up here, so let's just very gently tap that on, and then probably going to want to bring that down for the arms as well. So let's just lightly just stroke in across the center of these kind of cylindrical shapes, just where we've got the light a little bit more towards us. And the reason why I'm doing this in oranges instead of, say, just trying to get a white color and gently put that in is because if I do just whites and blacks and lighten layers and multiply layers, you can get very similar results, but sometimes you can still make things a little bit kind of too flat and lifeless. You do want to watch out for that. And again, let's just really warm up the boob area around here as well. Just with a good few strokes, just like so. And again, nothing too much with the darker tones because you can get too much of a gradient to hit in where you can see, for example, a little bit of patchiness. So what you can start to do is use the selection dropper tool, which is just by pressing Alt on the keyboard, or wait, let me say Alt on the keyboard, that's better. And just grab a few zones and just use them to kind of blend that color back in as well using a soft brush, just to make things not too aggressive if you can avoid it. Okay, relatively happy with that. I am going to go back onto my hard shadows layer just down here, and I'm certainly going to just erase ever so slightly the shadows we put there, just to take the edge off of them again, just so they're not popping too hard if they don't need to. And then what I'm going to start to think about on top of that is, okay, can I start to pop in some highlights? Can I actually take these colors now much further towards white, but without really selecting white itself? So I'm just going from this orange tone without moving the slider on the right, but staying in this box towards white, but not near white. And the reason why I'm doing this is because in contrast against the darker skinned character, this is still going to pop quite nicely for us anyway. So a new layer again, let's slide our way back in, and I'm just going to start to think, right, I think the front of the nose area here, let's make sure we're on our brush tool, is going to probably pop with a little bit of reflected light, just to let us know that's right up and forward in our character. And then maybe with the lips as well, we're just going to get a little bit or two right across there, just to really kind of make things interesting. Sometimes you get a little bit of shine or gleam over the eyelid like that. And this is kind of a bit more reminding me of the days of Betty Boop and stuff like that, with less anime style characters, but something that I think still works very well. And depending on your style, some people do like to kind of pop over here and just put a few lighter touches over the top of the cheeks as well. And again, less is more. That's why I'm using a low opacity brush, just so that I can build up instead of doing too much too early and then trying to think about erasing my way back down. So maybe I just want some highlights of light over the pop of the collarbone here. And then now I'm going to think maybe down this boob area here, we're going to get some areas where the light's just coming off this curved surface towards us, the viewer. Let's put a relatively nice large one about here. Again, very gently dotting that into place. Maybe we're getting something a little bit similar just over here. And we can always tidy up these shapes in just a moment. And very similar things on these other curves. Perhaps we're getting a nice bit over the shoulder, which is obviously very predominant. Maybe there's something happening at that end as well that's obviously facing away from us, a little bit less brisk. And then just perhaps a kind of line of light area that might describe where the biceps just popping up a little bit before the forearms, and the ulnar muscles kind of do some similar things just in here. Maybe you're just going to get a little bit down there as well. And again, what I can do now is either just selection tool a local color, and just start to tidy up the edges for whatever we're up to, just like so, and just like so, just to let things blend a little bit more. And also I'm just going to do the same here, where I made it just a little bit messy. Really, I was starting large here and just decided that actually I'm going to make things a little bit smaller, a little bit less aggressive with that highlight, whilst at the same time still trying to sell the idea of these surfaces popping a reflection black. Let's tidy that a little bit more. Okay, so I'm relatively happy with those highlight bits. And one last thing that you can do, just to again give things that extra pop, is pop down and find yourself that kind of lighter area in the skin palette of your character. Take that again slightly more towards that desaturated lighter area. And again, I'm going to, with a very low opacity brush, less than 20%, is I'm actually just going to follow some of those cast shadow edges, just so that they pop maybe even a little bit more. So for example, I might put some very light touches just round there on the nose, maybe just a little bit here as well, just to describe where that kind of nose sits on the face against the rest of the mouth, and maybe just tuck a few bits up against these cast shadow lines here, just against them here, and that helps to really just kick off the difference in these kind of tones and really just make things nice and interesting on the eye. This is where you get to use a little bit of your artistic license to decide where you do and don't really want these things to start to pop. But I do find just getting that, little bit of extra edge really can help sell some of that design of your characters. So again, just going around here, following that edge round, just keeping things inside the skin edge. And this is what I'd be doing with a lighter skinned character, probably with something that's a bit more sort of red to orange tone as well, just to give off the idea of subsurface scattering of light as things go kind of just under the skin and also bounce off of your flesh tones underneath before they come back out. Okay, so something relatively like that. Relatively happy with this character and its relatively smooth skin as well. But I did mention about finding your gradient of brown, just exactly how dark and how light you want to go. And the fun is of these character types is that you can play around with this as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the different areas of the skin layers that I've been working on right here. I'm just going to make sure I've got everything caught in that selection, except for maybe those highlights I'm not too worried about. Like so. And I'm going to group from layers so that it all sits in one folder. And then I could merge them, or I could duplicate them and merge them. And I tend to duplicate just to play it safe, just in case I want to come back. Make sure only one of these is turned on. Then I'm going to right click and merge group, so that now all of the skin's on one layer, except some of those highlights and bits. So let's make sure I've got those in as well. Bear with, I'm just going to merge that down with right click. You'll have to excuse me, my stylus that I'm using, the buttons are really hard to locate on this one. It rolls in your hand. So there we go. I've got all of my skin on one layer, and now you can start to play around and have a bit of fun. And this is quite easy in Photoshop. I'm actually just going to pop over to image and adjustments, and maybe I could go over to levels firstly, and I might think, right, do I like how dark the darks are? Should they be darker? Should the light areas be a little bit lighter? I can really play around with this slider, really brighten up this character and bring them to more life like this if I want to. Do the same with the middle tones. Where is a good spot to go? I'm going to leave it exactly where it was. Click OK. And then very similar again, I could go to image and I could actually go to, say, the color balance. Start to adjust these bits. Do I want more red tone to my characters, more purple tones? Obviously I'm going very extreme here, but just to give you an idea that you've got a lot that you can play around with. I'm going to leave all of that because I am relatively happy. And again, you can do the same thing in hue and saturation. Basically what I'm just trying to say to you guys is play around and have some fun with it. You've got so many options. It's awfully good. So now that we've got ourselves maybe an orc lady character, if we drag things into olive green, so she could be from a fantasy style situation, or Maybe just that disgusting Smurf kind of vibe. I really don't like that one. Or we could have something more purple and interesting. You've got options basically. And that can all be done by making sure your skin's on one layer, keeping things separate again, and getting the rest out of the way. So guys, I really do hope you found this to be useful when it comes to basically just getting some colouring in for some darker skinned characters, all whilst making sure that character looks alive and believable at the same time. I'm going to, obviously, as you can see, probably slip into a little bit of time lapse just to put the slightest bit of tone on the hair and maybe those bangles as well as just fuzzing up some of the line work to make it have a bit more pop. But whilst all of that is happening on screen, let me just say a great big thank you to my patrons on Patreon, because of course, if you guys have been hanging around on the channel for a while, you know that I love to make free drawing tutorials for you guys. I don't want any barriers in the way, but the only reason it's able to happen is from the help of some of those fantastic people that you can see scrolling on screen. And an extra big shout out to Fabio, Smooth Kiminal, Camera L, Gabriel C, Breton F, Epic Cara, Namudator, Mateo E, Joshua H, Andrew E, Homongchi L, Zenith 6, and Zahaki, amongst many others. So thank you very much again, guys. And because YouTube is a heartless numbers machine, I must ask you to like, share and subscribe. But really, if you've got any questions or suggestions for tutorials that you'd like to see further down the line, get yourself in the comment section below and maybe we'll be doing it next time around. In the meantime, have a lovely week and take care.